Let's talk this morning. We need to talk. It was Billy Bland that said, some are just sitting in the pews when they should be standing on the promises. It was one person that said, some are sitting in the Lord's army, which should be a cause for dismissal. One music artist or a group of artists wrote, if we are the body, why aren't His arms reaching? Why aren't His hands healing? Why isn't His love not showing that then there is a way? We're not having a sermon this morning. I decided that this morning, or not this morning, but this week. This is going to be more of an examination this morning. This is not what is good for that person, and that person. This is not, that person needs to work on that. Yeah, that person, he's not here, so he needs to learn this. No. No, this isn't this lesson. This lesson is this. This is for me. This lesson really has helped me more than it's going to really help you. I've looked at my life and examined myself way more than I really have in the recent months. This lesson is going to be a lesson over a course of a couple weeks. We're going to talk about discipleship. Are you just sitting here? Are you just sitting here? That's the lesson this morning. You know, because a lot of Christians are pew sitters. Some Christians are. They like to sit in the pews and they like to warm the pew when they're really taking up space for the person that's on fire for God. Is that you this morning? Are you just sitting there? That's our lesson. When we think about discipleship, we ought to think about service. Service with our hands, with our feet, with our mind. But yet some Christians are very lazy. And I'll warn you, this lesson is going to prick you. It pricks me. It pricks me before it pricks you. And again, I'm not preaching to you. I'm really preaching to me because these are things that Noah needs to work on. And Noah will work on. It's not, I'm going to try to. These are things that we will and we should do. Are we just sitting there? You know, when we think about godliness, we think about easiness. We like things that are very easy. We like things to be done for us. We like to do the bare minimum. What can I do to get by and still be okay with God? That's not the right attitude. How many services can I attend and God will be okay with me? What can I do? How can I treat brother so-and-so and it'll be okay? How much can I give it in the plate? What's the bare minimum can I give to God? Such attitudes are examples of lazy Christians. Simple. What are we going to do to increase our zeal for God? That's the question. What are we going to do to make sure that we're disciples of Jesus and not just warming the pews? Because if we're warming the pews, we're taking it away from someone who's actively on fire for God. And they got to go sit in the back. Don't do that. Don't do that. Laziness, the word slothful appears 15 times in the Bible. 15 times. It means like a sluggish person. And there are a lot of sins that contribute to that. You could list a lot of them. What sins are you doing? Are you practicing that contributes to your laziness as being a Christian? What sins am I doing that's hurting my influence and my work for God? We sing songs like, I want to be a worker for the Lord. Are you actually being a worker in the vineyard? Or are you being the one in the house that's sitting down? Are you actually going out and using your hands, your feet, your mouth for God? Revelation chapter 3, verse 16. How's your spiritual temperature? How do you measure your thermometer? Are you hot or are you very cold? Now, in Revelation 3:16, Jesus is talking to the church at Laodicea. Laodicea had a problem. They were not cold and they were not hot. God is not saying, I wish you were lost and I wish you were saved. That's not the idea. The focus is on lukewarmness. Are you just the person that's there, has one foot in godliness and one foot out? Are you the person that may show up here and doesn't do this here? Are you the one that's a Christian only on Sunday mornings and Monday through Saturday you could care less about God? Revelation 3:16. There's no purpose for lukewarm water. There's not. Nobody likes it, usually. I mean, if you do, well. Keep with me on the points. Nobody usually likes lukewarm water, but cold and hot water are used for good things. Cold water, cold drinks are used for what? A hot day outside. Well, warm is for when it's cold outside. Are you a hot Christian? Are you a on fire, zealous Christian? Titus 2 verse 14 says we're to be a zealous people, zealous of good works. Discipleship. Are we just sitting in the pews? Are we actively living for God? What are we doing this morning? This is an examination. This is not a sermon. We're not going to have points. We're going to see how far we go. I have things planned, but I might not get to it all. We're going to continue it next week because we need to examine our lives as we look at these things. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 4 says that Ephesus lost their first love. They lost their first love because they weren't on fire for God. They weren't doing what they needed to do. I'm not picking people. That's not what I'm doing. This isn't for a specific group of people or persons and this and this. And that's not what we're doing tonight. This is for everyone. This is for me mainly. But what are we doing for God? Matthew 22. Go with me there. This is kind of the main text. I didn't put that on the slideshow, but Matthew 22. And interestingly, the parable of the marriage feast comes to mind. Actually, I'll be honest. Leland gave me this verse. He said, this would be a good sermon. He said, he just gave me a piece of paper. He does this a lot. I appreciate it so much. But he gives me some lessons, And he gave me this verse, Matthew 22, 11 through 13. He's like, this would be a good lesson. I said, okay, I'll look at that. And I took it way probably further than he even thought of. But Matthew 22:11 says, when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there, you know this parable, there was a man that had not a wedding garment on. And he saith unto him, friend, how did you come in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Verse 13, bind him hand and foot and take him away and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do you have your wedding garment on? You see, a lot of Christians think that, well, I'm on the church directory. The little thing you can open or the app that my name's on there, so I must be faithful. Yet they forget that their name might not be in heaven's directory. Matthew 22, many Christians don't have the robe on. They might attend the service, they might serve, they might do the things that God, that the normal Christian does. But actively, they're not serving God. On the appearance, they are, not on the inside. Pharisees were like that. Pharisees tried to scoot around obedience and tried to appear godly on the outside, but on the inside they were full of dead man's bones. Is that you, Christian, this morning? Examine yourselves. Not your spouse, not your friend, not your son, not your daughter, not your grandparents, father, mother. Yourself. That's what we're going to do this morning. Godliness is not defined by attendance. In Micah 6 and verse 8, you know this verse. Micah chapter 6, verse 8, what does the Lord require of thee but to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with my God? There's no mention of attendance there. Now, attendance will result when you do those things, but just because I attend the assembly doesn't mean anything. Really. If my life outside of the assembly is not for God, I might as well just not come. That's Israel's problem. Is that our problem? Matthew 22, 37 through 40. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with everything you have, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Doesn't mention attendance. Attendance will result in that, absolutely. Absolutely, attendance is required, but it's not the definition of godliness. What am I doing for God? Do I have my robe on? Let me ask a couple questions as we go through our lesson. Like I said, we're going to see how far we get. I really want to take the time to do this. We're going to have a series on discipleship. What am I doing for God? Am I just sitting there? Number one, let's kind of talk about this question. Do I give excuses for obedience? That's the first question we need to ask. Ask yourself that. Do I, Noah Olson, you put your name there, do I give excuses so I could disobey God? Or just disobey, so I don't have to obey? It's interesting. A student who is under the teacher is not going to find himself under the teacher very long if he doesn't obey the teacher. A master and a student, a master and a disciple obeys the master. We obey our Lord, Jesus. He's given us commands to do. We follow Him to the best of our ability. But it's sometimes the attitude of some Christians, and what we do is we look at the commandments of God as burdensome, as rule-keeping. Well, God says, I have to do this, or I have to do this. This is something I have to do. I just do it just so I don't go to hell. That seems to be a common idea. 1 John 5:3 tells me His commandments are not grievous. And sadly, sometimes we can do this, is we work so hard to try to get around disobedience, that we work so harder to disobey rather than to obey God. You know the student that tries to work so harder to cheat on the test than he would have done less work by just doing what the teacher required. Do we do that as Christians? Try to scoot around different things, and that's not godliness. Sometimes we may ask questions like, what is the minimum I have to do? Or, how close can I get to sin without sinning? That's a bad question. How close? What is the line? It's not sin. But I need to run that way. Matthew 5:29 through 30. Joseph. How far can I get? What do I have to do for God? Such is an example or is manifestation of an ungodly, a prideful, arrogant heart. We need to stay away from that. James chapter 2, verse 10. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he's guilty of all. I don't want to scoot around obedience. Remember, I'm a Christian. The idea of, I want liberty and freedom, that comes through obedience. John 8:32 and following. Galatians 5:13. Don't use your liberty as an occasion for the flesh. But that's the first question I want to ask, is am I trying to find excuses to get around obedience? Let's take a work profile. Let's do a work profile this morning. Let me ask you 4 questions under this profile. Businesses will ask their employees, they'll bring them into the office and ask them some questions. Have you done this? How's this going? Or I see you're kind of being lackadaisical on this. Why is that? Can you give me the reason for that? So let's do that here. Let's imagine us and Jesus sitting on one side of the table, we're on the other side, and Jesus has his notebook, and he's asking us these questions. Let's ask these this morning. Number 1. How many hours do you put in? That's number 1. How many hours do you put in? Now, usually, at a workplace, you punch your time clock in, and you make sure you have your 40 hours or plus. You can probably do work more. A lot of people do. But how many hours do you put in? In Nehemiah 8, it's interesting. Go with me to Nehemiah 8. This is an interesting, beautiful passage. Nehemiah 8 and verse 8. It's said of the people. Verse 3. Nehemiah 8 verse 3. It says, Ezra verse 2, and he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday, before the men and the women, and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law, morning and midday. How many hours do you put in for God? 4 hours are not enough. Now, I was thinking about this during this lesson, because we can, when I say we, I mean Noah including, we can sometimes have this attitude that, 4 hours, Sunday morning, Bible class worship, Sunday night and Wednesday night, man, that's just such a sacrifice. We complain. It's like we look at the attendance and the assembly times as, man, it's just so hard. When that's just a given. The 4 hours that we come together to serve God, that's just a given. That's just something all Christians do. I like what Gus Nichols said. He said that I chose to go to worship on Sunday morning, not this morning, but when I obeyed the gospel. Now, I understand there are situations, work and sick. I'm not talking about that. You know that. We're talking about those who are not on fire for God. How many hours do I put in? There are a couple areas that I want to ask myself. What about office hours? And what I mean by that is Bible study. And we'll make a greater point of this in a moment. But how many hours do I put in for Bible study? How many hours am I opening the book? How many hours am I taking notes or writing, writing down notes and observations? And how many hours do I spend in that? Good rule is 30 minutes to an hour a day. What about meetings? In businesses, you get together with bosses and coworkers, and you have meetings during the day. How's your meeting hours going? You come here every time the door's open, or at least you try to. That's your desire. Every time we have a gathering, do you try to be there? What about your meeting with God in prayer? How many hours do you spend in prayer to God? What about your communications? In communications, you have to call people in businesses. Sometimes you call, you email people, you type a message, you send a letter. What about your communications? How's your communication? How many Bible studies have you conducted in the past year? 1? 3? 0? How many hours have you put in? Now, we're not here to just punch a clock. That's not what I'm saying. But have you ever examined how many hours of your day, 168 hours in the week, how many of those hours are for the Lord? That's number one. Number two is, what are my results? It's interesting in John 15. In John chapter 15 and verse 2, Jesus is talking about the vine and the husbandman. It's and something that we, as God's people, if we're going to be true disciples of Jesus, need to ask is, what are my results? I can't judge your heart. I can't. Actually, it's a sin to judge your heart. John 7:24. I need to judge righteous judgment, but I can judge and see the results, the fruit. John 15 verse 2, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, He taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, He purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. How much fruit are you bearing? You measure fruit bearing by a couple things. Sports players measure success by what? By statistics. Construction workers will measure success by their how big their building, or how good the building looks compared to the picture. There are a lot of different areas. How do we measure success? Have I grown in the past year? In the past year, in 1 year, you can remember about a year. How much have I grown in the knowledge of God? Do I know more? Do more verses come to mind when certain situations come about? Do I know more about the Bible as a whole? Can I give you the context of the book of Matthew? I'm not talking about the Greek. I'm not talking about being a scholar. And remember, God doesn't require scholars; He requires students, though. Have I grown in the past year? Can I see the fruit of that? Do I have a desire maybe to teach a little kids Bible class, or to share with my knowledge about that? Maybe I want to teach an auditorium class. Maybe I want to serve and give a Devo here. Growth. Number two, I'm coming back to this. Have I conducted any Bible studies? Have I baptized anyone? Now, your success only shouldn't be on baptisms, because, that's not your decision. But aren't baptisms fruit or manifestations of you doing something? They are. How am I doing in those areas? That's number two, the results. Number three, what do my coworkers say of me? I'm not talking about physical coworkers. We'll get into that at a later point. But go with me to 3 John 3 through 6. 3 John 3 through 6. What do my coworkers, my fellow Christians, say of me? That's a good work profile indicator. In the workplace, did you know that, wherever you are, there are always people that watch what you're doing. Always. You could be maybe at a business. Your coworkers do it. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe your other fellow teachers see how you do things. Maybe you work at a store and your other coworkers see what you do, whether it be good, whether it be bad, whether you come in late, whether you leave early. Well, interestingly, John writes, verse 3, "For I rejoice greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth." These brethren are coming and telling of the truth that is in you, Gaius. He's talking about Gaius. "Even as you're walking in the truth, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, you're doing faithfully whatsoever you're doing to the brethren, to the strangers, which have borne witness of your charity, Gaius, before the church, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well." John hears about Gaius' report. What do people say about you? Maybe you go visit Oak Grove Church of Christ one Sunday night. Maybe you go visit Chipman Road Church of Christ. Maybe you go visit, Harrisonville or South Point or whatever you can think of. Would you be lying if you talk good about your brethren here? Or do you have to come up with good things? What would brethren say of you if you weren't there to other people? Would they say, "Man, that person, she's so nice"? Would they say, "Well, I don't know if he's sinning"? No, not brother so-and-so. He wouldn't be living in sin. He's such a good, godly, faithful man. I would, no. You have a good reputation. What do your coworkers say of you? Proverbs 22:1 says, "A good name is rather be chosen than gold or silver." That's number 3. What do your coworkers say of you? And then number 4, what is your work like when the master is not there? What is your work like when the master is not there? Luke chapter 12. Go with me to verses 47 and through 48. We won't probably read all this, but some employees only work when the boss is over their shoulder, when they have a due date coming up, or when something of great importance is about to happen. What about your work ethic? Do you only work and are only godly around Christians? Do you only act as the way you ought when your Christian family is in attendance? Or do you remember that the Lord's always watching you? Verse 42, who then is that faithful and wise steward? Remember, we're servants, we're disciples. Who is that? Well, that should be you, that should be me. What am I doing? Whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household to give them their portion of meat in due season. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, he's away. But when he comes back, he shall find so doing. Of a truth, I will make you, or rather, I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. And if that servant say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maid servants, I don't have to do it. The man's not even here. The Lord of that servant will come in a day, verse 46. When he looketh not for him, at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him asunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. What's my work ethic when I'm at home? When I'm by myself in the computer, no one's watching me. Do I type in something I should? When I'm at home and my attitude's just not good towards my family, my friends, whatever it might be. How's my attitude? What's my work ethic when the boss isn't there? Now, God's always there. But when the elders aren't overseeing me, or the men's not there, or the family, my Christian family, what's my work ethic? 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. Read that verse with me. You know this. Remember, it was Saul that offered a sacrifice where he shouldn't have done it. And what does Samuel tell him? Obedience is better than sacrifice. How's your work ethic? How's your work ethic? That's a good question to ask. Do you scoot around to get away from obedience, or are you a hard worker for God? Because if I'm not giving my all, then I'm giving none. Jesus says in Matthew 12 and verse 30, if you're not with me, you're against me. If you're not fully committed to God, you might as well just go. Right? Might as well just give up. Jesus wants full committers, not half-hearted. All right, let's talk about a second idea. Second idea is, and this one really hit me. This is something that Noah's working on very deeply. Number 2, what's the quality of your prayer life? What's the quality of your prayer life? 1 Thessalonians 5:17. You know this verse. You could probably quote it. If not, let's read it. 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. What's the quality of your prayer life? It's interesting. When it comes to the master and a disciple, masters and disciples talk, right? They need to talk. The disciple needs the master. He needs to teach. He needs to be taught. He needs to see experience. He needs to be experienced in all these things. He needs the master. But sometimes Christians want the blessings of prayer without the beseeching of the master. They want the blessings that prayer brings, but then they don't even care to talk to their God. I need to go to God in prayer more than I think. When we think about prayer, we need to put away the excuses. There are a lot of excuses that we can use when it comes to prayer. Well, I just don't know how to pray. Well, learn. Learn how to pray. Matthew 6, 9 through 13, Jesus gives us a model prayer. He shows us how to pray. There are various other passages that we can use to pray. Well, I just don't feel like praying. You think Paul felt like praying every time he prayed? Our emotions are going to go like this. Still pray. Still talk to God. He bends his ear down so he can hear you. You need to lift your voice up so he can hear you. What's the quality of my prayer life? Don't put away the excuses. Well, prayer doesn't work. Well, Scripture disproves that. I looked at a little bit of the life of Jesus. Looked at some verses here. How can I improve the quality of my prayer life? If I'm going to be a disciple of my Lord, I need to talk to my God. There needs to be communication. No person is going to have a relationship with their parents if they don't talk to them. No person is going to have a relationship with their children if they don't talk to them. Right? There needs to be communication there. It has to be. Communication is one of the foundational principles of a relationship. Well, ultimately, and most importantly with God, I've done this. Confess your faults one another. I have treated prayer as just a check off the box. So I can say I pray. That's not prayer. Prayer is a communication. I am talking to my Lord. And if it helps you, imagine it in your mind. Imagine yourself actually, maybe you close your eyes. Maybe you don't close your eyes in prayer. That's not commanded. But, maybe you close your eyes in prayer and you imagine yourself before the throne of God, sitting there and Him bending His ear to you. Do you do that? How's your prayer life? Examine yourself. Ask yourself these questions. All right, here's some examples from Jesus. In Mark chapter 1, in verse 35, Jesus, I took some of these, I made these applicable to us. How can I improve my prayer life? Number one, maybe you get up early. Maybe you set your alarm at 7 a.m. Get up at 6:50. 10 minutes. Let your day be opened with God. Just talk to Him. Maybe you're just in bed. You wake up and you're not even really out of bed. You're just sitting in there laying. I do this. You're just sitting there and you're laying. It's like, I don't want to get up. Right? Everybody's done that. Maybe during that time, maybe you're just verbally talking to God for 10 minutes. Mark 1:35. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, He, Jesus, went out and departed into a solitary place and there prayed. Maybe you get up a little early, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I don't know, 5 minutes. Just thank God for the day. John Bunyan said, a man who does not, he didn't say these exact words, but I'm going to try to paraphrase his word. He said, a man that does not start his day with God in the morning will scarcely find Him during the day. That's a good thought. I like that. That's number one. Look at another example of Jesus. Matthew 26. How can I improve the quality of my prayer life? Matthew 26. Look at verse 26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, this is the Lord's Supper, and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, take ye, this is my body. Number two, pray before every meal. Pray before every meal. You may already do that. That's good. Do it more. If you eat 3 times a day, and you add a snack in there, maybe 2 or 3 times, you're already praying 5 to 6 times a day. Pray. Pray before every meal. Number three, Luke chapter 6. In Luke chapter 6, it's interesting. Jesus was such a good prayer person. He loved to pray. He was His Father. He got to talk to His Father. But in Luke chapter 6, 12 through 13, Jesus is about to pick His disciples, but before He does, verse 12, and it came to pass in those days that He went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. All night. One preacher asked, how could you pray all night to God? I mean, it's like 10, 12 hours. And then the preacher observed this. He said, there were 12 apostles. Maybe every night or every hour He prayed for a different apostle for 12 hours. That's a thought. I love that thought so much. But we draw this lesson from this thought. To how do I improve my prayer life? Number 3, pray before big decisions. God doesn't want to be left out of your decisions, so pray. A husband that makes a big purchase without his wife is going to hear about it. Well, we should treat that the same with God, and even more. Even the little things. Father, I'm having a bad day at work. I'm about to go to my boss and let him know something. Be with me. Father, I'm just about to make a really big decision for my family. Be with me. Pray before big decisions. Jesus did. Number next is something I pulled from Matthew 3. Jesus prayed. There's a verse in Matthew 3, 21 and 22 about Him praying. And that was during His baptism. And I draw the lesson, pray after big joys. Big joys. Pray. You try to do this. It doesn't have to be 3-hour prayer. It can be a 10-second thank you, Father. It can be a minute in just thanking God for what just happened. Maybe you did really well on a test for those in school. Maybe it was something at work you were very stressed about and it went well. A meeting that you were very, very anxious about and went good. Shouldn't you tell your Father? Thank you. Thank God. Thank God. Now, when 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says pray without ceasing, that doesn't mean I need to be like bowing my head, closing my eyes for 24 hours, 24/7. It either means 2 things. Albert Barnes gave these thoughts. He said, number 1, it means either you're always ready to pray, or you're always in that mindset to pray. That's a good thought. Always be in the mindset of prayer. That's number next. All right. Let me give you some practical advice. We won't have too much time left to go to the third point, but practical advice for prayer. These are just practical advice. How do I increase my prayer life? I'm trying to implement these in my life. Number 1, maybe make a prayer list. Maybe you write it down. Have a little notebook, and you say, "I'm going to do that." I love what one of my instructors said. He said, "Take a notebook, and maybe you put a date on it, And then you write all your prayers. And then, over time, you maybe do that every single day. Every single day you do that. And then you look back and you go through all the things you requested and you say, wait a minute, those have been answered. That's going to make the power of prayer just beam. And that's going to make you want to pray more and talk more. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, Paul gives 4 different lists, 4 different categories of prayer. Supplications, intercessions, prayers, and giving of thanks. Maybe in your prayer journal, you divide it up into 4. And you put the little prayer requests in each one. Like that. Maybe that's what you do. Recognize the blessings of prayer. That's number next. Recognize the blessings of prayer. Prayer is powerful. It works. James 5:16, it works. You're beseeching the Almighty God, the Creator of the universe, that's going to use providence to execute. And you're bringing that on. Matthew 7:7-8, it pleases the asker. There are a lot of other verses you could go to that prayer is very powerful. Number next is don't get distracted. I've done this a lot. You start prayer and then your mind wanders. And that sometimes but try your very hardest to use this time for God. Don't get distracted. You wouldn't do that with your spouse, right? You wouldn't do that with your children or with a best friend. Why do you do it with God? That's God's time. Cars. I love going to the car. I study in my car. I work in my car. Sometimes I go to like a price chopper and sit in the parking lot. I'll work. I love it. You control the temperature and it's perfect. Pray in your car. Closet, basement where it's quiet. You just go 10 minutes, 15 minutes, pray. Don't let anything come in between that. That's number 2. What's the quality of your prayer life? Romans chapter 12. Finish this verse with me. Someone said that prayer is the oxygen that keeps the fire going. I like that. Romans 12:11. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Verse 12. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. How's your prayer life, Christian? How's your prayer life? Let's kind of conclude. I don't know how far we'll get to this, but number 3. Number 3 is, what's your study like? What's your study like? How's your reading of the Bible? A Christian that is not in the book is like a biology student who never reads or touches the textbook. How are you? How much do you read? How much are you in the Scriptures? One said that college students should spend 2 hours of outside study for every hour in class. That would mean that the Christian needs to spend 8 hours a week of study outside of the assembly. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Many Christians don't know much. Some know the milk. Only few know the meat. Are you part of the few? Do you know the meat of the Word? In Luke 23, Luke 24, verse 32, after the two talked to Jesus on the road to Emmaus, verse 32, and they said one to another, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us, by the way, and while he opened to us the Scriptures? Our heart was on fire because of what he said. Is your heart on fire because you read the Bible? Or is it not because you don't? One person said, we need to read many books. We need to live in the Bible. Theodore Roosevelt said, a deep knowledge of the Bible is worth far more than any college education that you're going to get. How's your knowledge of the Bible? What do we do? What are we studying? Some read it like a history book, a fictitious narrative, self-help book, like the 1001 ways that, you know those books. That's not the Bible. 1 Peter 2 verse 2 says, I need to desire the sincere milk of the Word. Why? That we may grow thereby. How am I doing in my study? We're going to stop there because we're out of time, but we'll pick up next time. We're just going to continue on. We're going to have more points with this. But the question again remains, are you just sitting there? Are you just sitting in the pew, dear Christian, or are you working for God? And this is not a point fingers and, that person needs to do this better, and that person needs to do this better, and they're not really good in that. No, that's not the purpose of this. That's not a sermon. This is an examination of me, of you. What am I doing for God? Am I good in those areas? Because remember, I'm a disciple of Jesus. I'm not a disciple of Jesus. If I'm not for Him, then I'm against Him. How's my dedication to Him? I don't want to be just sitting there. It's easy to sit. It's easy. It's easy to come on Sunday morning and even be there on Sunday night, Wednesday night. It's easy. It's just an hour. But what about outside? Is this my whole life? Or is the church just a social club? How am I doing in those things? Maybe you're here tonight. Maybe that is you. Maybe you need to change some things in your life. Do that this morning. Maybe you need to just confess that to God. Maybe it is a public sin. You don't have to come forward if it's not a public sin unless you want to. Maybe you need to obey the gospel. Obey it. You're not a Christian. Obey it now. God doesn't excuse sin. If you're living in sin, believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Repent of the sin that's in your life. Confess Jesus' name. Be baptized for the remission of sins. And when you do that, God adds you to the church. Do that this morning. Don't hesitate. If we can help you or pray with you or encourage you in any way to do better, to answer any questions you might have, please come now as we stand, as we sing.
Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord.